The wind howled over the dry plains that stretched as far as the eye could see, rattling through the wooden boards of the small, decaying house where Eliza knelt with her hands pressed against her chest, her heart hammering from the words her husband had just spoken. "You're worth nothing to me," he spat, his eyes narrowed with cruel disdain. "A barren wife is no wife at all." She swallowed back the sting of tears, but her breath shook as she watched him toss a burlap sack onto the table with a thud. Corn, just a sack of corn. That was the price he had traded her for. Her dignity, her vows, her love, sold like livestock for the promise of food. She had known James could be cold, but never in her darkest imaginings. Did she think he would reduce her to a transaction, barter her life away as though she were less than human? The man who had once whispered vows beneath a country chapel now regarded her as a burden, and the man standing in the doorway, the rancher who had silently agreed to take her, said nothing, only studied her with steady eyes the color of storm-tossed skies. The silent rancher, they called him in town, because he spoke rarely and always chose his words with the weight of stones. His name was Daniel, a man who worked the largest spread of land in the county, who had buried more pain in his years than most would ever live to know. Eliza's stomach churned as her husband shoved her forward, his hands rough on her shoulders, forcing her closer to the stranger who now, by some cruel twist of fate, was to be her new master. She stumbled, her worn shoes catching on the dirt floor, and lifted her face to Daniel. She expected mockery or judgment, but instead she found something unsettling in his gaze, something that did not align with the cruelty of the bargain. There was pity there, and something deeper, though his jaw remained set in silence. The neighbors had whispered often about Daniel, about how he had lost his wife and unborn child in a harsh winter 5 years ago, about how he had buried them with his own hands and since then had lived in a silence so complete it became its own language. Some called him cold, some said haunted, but no one dared to cross him. And now, as Eliza's husband pushed her toward him, she saw no hunger or desire in Daniel's eyes, but rather a steady strength. A man accustomed to loss yet unwilling to crush another already broken. "She's yours," James sneered, scooping up the sack of corn as though he had made the best bargain of his life, his boots clattering across the threshold as he left without a glance back. The door slammed, and in the sudden silence, Eliza felt the weight of abandonment collapse over her shoulders. She was alone, discarded, humiliated. Her breath trembled, and for a moment she wished the earth itself would open and swallow her. Yet Daniel did not move to touch her or claim her as James had implied. He simply stepped aside, gesturing toward the open door with a tilt of his head, silently, offering her a choice: leave and vanish into the world with nowhere to go, or follow him into an uncertain future. With nothing but the clothes on her back, Eliza chose to follow. Her feet felt heavy as they crossed the dusty trail leading away from the shack she had once called home. Daniel's horse was tethered nearby, and without a word he helped her mount, his calloused hand surprisingly gentle as it steadied her trembling body. He mounted behind her, and the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves carried them toward the horizon, toward a life she had not chosen, but had been thrust into by cruelty. The ranch rose before them like an island of survival in the wilderness. Sprawling fields and cattle grazing in the distance, fences stretching long into the fading light of day. Daniel's silence was a weight, yet not oppressive. It was almost protective, like a shield keeping the world's cruelty at bay. When he finally dismounted and offered his hand to her once more, she took it, her eyes lowering, waiting for commands, for expectations, for ownership. But instead, he simply nodded toward the house and walked inside. The cabin was simple but sturdy, built with care and strength, unlike the crumbling shack she had left behind. A fire burned low in the hearth, filling the air with warmth and the faint scent of pine. Daniel set about stirring the flames, his movements practiced, and when the light grew strong again, he placed a bowl of stew before her. Eliza hesitated, uncertain, but the gnawing hunger in her belly betrayed her, and she ate slowly, her eyes never leaving the silent man across from her. Finally, when her strength returned, she whispered, "Why did you take me?" Her voice cracked, the question heavy with confusion, fear, and the faintest flicker of hope. Daniel's eyes lifted, and for a long time he said nothing. The silence stretched until she thought he might never answer, but then in a voice low and rough with disuse, he spoke, "Because no one deserves to be thrown away." The words lodged in her chest, simple yet carrying a weight she could hardly bear. No one had spoken kindness into her heart for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like. Tears burned her eyes, but she blinked them back, unwilling to show weakness, though inside she was breaking. That night, as she lay in the small bed Daniel had made ready for her, Eliza stared at the ceiling and wondered if life had truly ended with James's betrayal, or if somehow, impossibly, it had begun anew here in the silent rancher's home. Days turned into weeks, and Eliza found herself learning the rhythms of ranch life, rising with the dawn to feed chickens, gather eggs, and mend clothes. Daniel never forced her, never demanded, but his steady presence seemed to invite her into a life of usefulness, of quiet dignity. The ranch was a world of hard work and silence, yet it offered something she had never known: peace. Still, the whispers of shame haunted her. The women in town, when she dared to ride in with Daniel for supplies, looked at her with knowing eyes, their lips curling in disdain. "That's her," they would murmur, "the Barren wife who was traded for corn." The words cut deep, and at night, Eliza would curl against the quilts and wonder if Daniel, too, saw her as broken, as worthless. But if he did, he never showed it. Instead, when her hands blistered from labor, he quietly left salve by her bedside. When she faltered while trying to herd the cattle, he stepped in silently, never scolding, only guiding. And when the memories of James's cruelty returned in the dark, she sometimes caught Daniel watching her with eyes that spoke volumes without a word, eyes that seemed to say, "You are not less." One evening, a storm tore across the plains, lashing the windows and shaking the roof. Lightning split the sky and thunder rattled her bones. Eliza trembled, memories of being left alone in storms before clawing at her. But Daniel entered the room carrying a lantern, his presence steady as stone. He did not touch her, did not speak, only set the lantern near and sat on the chair by her door until sleep finally claimed her trembling body. In that silence, Eliza realized the truth. Daniel was not a man of words, but a man of action, and his action spoke of a respect she had never been given. The realization bloomed inside her like the first wildflower after a hard winter. As months passed, Eliza's laughter returned in small bursts, surprising even herself. She found joy in the foals born on the ranch, in the golden sunset spilling across the fields, in the rare moments when Daniel's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. She began to believe that perhaps her worth was not defined by the womb that had failed her, nor the husband who had cast her aside, but by the life she built with her own hands and the quiet strength of the man who had chosen not to discard her. One day, as they stood side by side mending a fence, Daniel finally spoke more than a few words. His voice was quiet but steady. "Eliza," he said, her name soft on his lips. "Life doesn't measure you by what you cannot give. It measures you by how you keep standing." Her breath caught, and for the first time since the day she had been sold like a commodity, she smiled. Not because someone had given her value, but because she had found it within herself. Though the world still whispered cruel names, Eliza no longer bowed beneath them. She walked with her head high beside the silent rancher, and in his rare words and steady presence, she found not just a home but a life. The sack of corn that had once marked her shame became a memory she no longer feared, for it was the beginning of the road that led her here, to dignity, to peace, and perhaps in time even to love. And so, dear listener, if this story touched your heart, if Eliza's journey from betrayal to hope made you feel the power of resilience, then I invite you to stay with us for more stories.